Hello, everyone. I am Alex Brooks. I'm 35 years old, and this is the story of how my own parents sold my house out from under me while I was thousands of miles away, working to build a future they never believed I could have. Before I tell you how I walked into their company 2 months later and became their new boss, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. It all started on a Tuesday, a cold, gray afternoon in Berlin. From my vantage point on the 54th floor, the city spread out like a circuit board, intricate and humming with energy. Inside, my team was celebrating. The air was thick with the scent of success and expensive champagne. The ink was still wet on a multi-million-euro partnership, a deal that my company, Veritas Capital, had been chasing for 6 hard months. It was a career-defining moment, the kind of success you dream about when you're eating instant noodles in a tiny apartment, trying to make payroll. My CFO, Sophia, raised her glass. To Alex, the man who sees angles no one else does. The team cheered. I smiled, a genuine one for a moment, and raised my own glass. But the noise, the backslapping, it felt distant. I was proud of them, proud of the work, but a part of me always remained separate, an observer. I stepped out onto the balcony, the cold wind a welcome shock to my system. I needed a moment to just breathe, to let the reality of the wind sink in. That's when my phone buzzed. A familiar number. My mother, Margaret. I almost let it go to voicemail, but a sliver of hope, that stubborn, foolish part of me that never quite dies, made me answer. Maybe she had that sixth sense mothers are supposed to have. Maybe she was calling to say she was proud of me, even though she had no idea what I really did for a living. To her, I ran a small consulting gig in Zurich. It was simpler that way. It kept her from trying to take credit or, worse, offering her unsolicited, undermining advice. Alex, darling, her voice chirped. A high, musical sound that was a little too bright, too cheerful. I knew that tone. It was her happy news for me, bad news for you voice. Hi, Mom. How are you? Wonderful. I have the most fantastic news, she said, and I could practically hear the triumphant smile in her voice. We sold your house. It's done. The papers were signed this morning. The world went silent. The muted cheer from inside, the distant traffic on the streets below, it all just vanished. My house. The word echoed in the empty space in my head. Not the house. My house. The one in London I had poured 5 years of my life and every spare dollar into. The one where I'd paid the mortgage every single month without fail. The one I had gutted and renovated from top to bottom with my own 2 hands on the rare weekends I wasn't working. The one where the deed was still, supposedly for temporary safekeeping, in my parents' names, a relic of a time when I was naive enough to believe their promises. You what? I managed to choke out, my throat suddenly constricting. We sold it. The market is just perfect right now. She laughed. A light, airy sound that was like glass grinding in my ears. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Alex. It's just a house. Your father and I needed the liquidity. Things at Barton and Company haven't been great, as you know. And you're always flying all over Europe with that little advisory gig of yours. You're never there anyway. It was for the good of the family. That little advisory gig. The one that had just secured a deal larger than her company's entire quarterly revenue. For the good of the family. The phrase they always used when they were about to take something from me. I couldn't form a sentence. My mind was a whiteout of rage and betrayal. Betrayal is a cold thing. It doesn't burn. It freezes you from the inside out. Before I could find a single word, she added, We'll put your share in a trust for you, of course, when we feel the time is right. And with that, she was gone, leaving me with a dial tone and a hollow, aching void in my chest. A text from my brother, Marcus, lit up the screen a minute later. Mom told you about the house. Sorry, bro, but business is business. Business is business. They had no idea who they were doing business with. I gripped the cold railing of the balcony, my knuckles turning white. The Berlin wind whipped at my face, but I didn't feel it. I took one deep, ragged breath, then another. The hurt was there, a sharp, familiar sting I'd felt 1,000 times before. But this time, something else was underneath it. Not sadness. Not despair. Something cold and clear and final. An ending. And a beginning. I walked back inside, past my celebrating team, my face a stony mask. I found my legal partner, Lucas Hoffman. I put a hand on his shoulder. He saw my face, and his smile instantly vanished. "Alex, what is it? What's wrong?" "It's time," I said, my voice low and steady, a strange calm settling over me. "They just gave us the final reason. Accelerate the plan. I want everything ready in 48 hours. Lucas's eyes widened, then narrowed with understanding. He simply nodded. "It will be done." The next 48 hours were a descent into a controlled storm. The celebratory champagne was replaced by endless cups of black coffee that tasted like ash. Our command center, a sterile suite of rented offices in Berlin, became a war room. It was just me, Lucas, and my CFO, Sophia Chen. The three of us against an empire. My family's empire. Our target, Barton and Company, the company my father, Robert Brooks, wore like a second skin. He was the CEO, a title he believed made him royalty. My mother, Margaret, was his queen, the elegant communications director. And my brother, Marcus, the crown prince, the incompetent COO, waiting to inherit the kingdom. Sophia was our spearhead. She was a prodigy, an analyst who could read a balance sheet like a novel, finding the plot holes and the hidden villains. Her drive was relentless, fueled by a quiet fury that matched my own. Years ago, fresh out of university with top honors, she'd interviewed for a junior analyst position at Barton and Company. My father had looked at her resume, then at her, and dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "I just don't think you'd be a good fit for our culture, dear." He'd never seen the brilliant mind behind her quiet demeanor. He just saw a young woman who didn't come from the right background. Now, she was methodically taking apart the culture that had rejected her, piece by rotten piece. "Here," she said, sliding a tablet across the polished table toward me. The screen glowed with color-coded charts and alarming red flags. "This is the jugular. A massive syndicated loan they took out 3 years ago, leveraged against their prime commercial properties. The covenants are incredibly strict, designed to protect the lenders. But Marcus," she said his name with clinical disdain, "has been playing fast and loose with the numbers, trying to hide a significant 20% downturn in their core revenue stream. The accounting isn't just creative. It's practically fiction." I zoomed in on a footnote, a detail buried deep in the financial statements. "This accounting method, capitalizing operational expenses, is sloppy. It's a huge red flag for any auditor. It leaves them completely exposed." Sophia gave a grim, knowing smile. "It's worse than sloppy. It's the exact same amateurish trick Marcus used when he lost the money from your college fund." And just like that, the sterile Berlin office dissolved, and I was 16 years old again, standing on the thick Persian rug in my father's study. The room was a shrine to him, paneled with dark wood and smelling of leather, cigars, and self-importance. I held a crisp, white envelope in my hand. It was my acceptance letter to the London School of Economics, a top-tier business school. My dream. My father was at his desk, signing letters with a heavy gold pen. He didn't look up. "What is it, Alex?" "I got in," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. "Elsie, they've accepted me." He finished his signature with a flourish before finally deigning to look at me. He took the letter, glanced at it, and set it down on his desk with an air of profound indifference. "Be realistic, Alex," he'd said, his voice dripping with a weary condescension that was far more painful than anger. "Marcus needs our support for his new import-export venture. That's where the family's resources need to go. Business school is a waste of money when you don't have the right instincts for it. Barton and Company will go to Marcus one day. Your place is to support him." A month later, I discovered they had emptied my college fund, a trust my grandfather had started for me with a simple, handwritten note. For Alex's future, whatever he chooses it to be, my parents had chosen for me. They had given it all to Marcus for a venture that went bankrupt in less than a year. That was the day I stopped seeing them as parents and started seeing them for what they were. The primary backers of my brother, with me as a line item under expenditures. I shook the memory away, the bitterness of familiar taste in my mouth. How did they not see this coming? How do they not know about Veritas? I asked, the question that had been a low hum in the back of my mind for months. That's the beauty of your strategy, Alex. Lucas chimed in, his German accent precise and calming. He was the architect of our legal fortress. Veritas Capital isn't a public-facing firm. We are a private equity fund. A ghost. We specialize in discretion. To the outside world, the shares and debt of Barton & Company have been acquired by a constellation of unrelated shell corporations, each one registered in a different jurisdiction: Delaware, the Caymans, Luxembourg. There is no public trail leading back to us, let alone to you. Your family runs a legacy company. They think in terms of old-world rivals like Sterling Corp or G&T. They would never think to look for a ghost in their own machine. He was right. I had deliberately built Veritas to be a shadow. After the LSE incident, I'd worked 3 jobs: barista, library clerk, waiting tables, to put myself through a less prestigious, but still excellent state university. I'd learned then that I didn't want their approval. I didn't want their help. I never wanted my father to be able to boast about my son, the CEO at his country club. I never wanted Marcus to show up asking for a handout. My success was mine alone, built in the dark, away from their judgmental, possessive eyes. My gaze drifted to a worn leather-bound copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius on the corner of the desk. It was a gift from my mentor, Harold Peterson. I'd met him while waiting tables at that same country club my parents belonged to. He was a retired executive, a titan of industry who had built his own company from scratch. One evening, he watched me calmly and diplomatically handle a belligerent, drunken customer who was furious that his steak was medium rare instead of medium. After the man had stormed off, Harold had called me over. He didn't ask about my family. He asked me what I read. He asked me what I wanted to build. When I told him my ambitions, he didn't laugh or tell me to be realistic. He listened. He became the father figure my own father never was. He gave me my first seed loan, £10,000. It was a fraction of what my parents had frivolously thrown at Marcus's failures, but it was given with something far more valuable: faith. The inscription in the book read, "Talent is like water. It will always find its way through the cracks." HP. A secure video call flickered onto the main screen, interrupting my thoughts. It was James Whitaker, a veteran board member at Barton & Company. He was a man from my father's generation, all tweed jackets and quiet dignity, but his eyes held a deep, profound weariness that I recognized. He was a true company man, loyal to the legacy my grandfather had built, and he had watched my father's arrogance and my brother's incompetence run that legacy into the ground. "Alex," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "The mood here is tense. Robert is bluffing his way through the board meetings, all bluster and false optimism. But the numbers don't lie. He's planning another round of layoffs after the new year to keep the shareholders happy before the annual report. Good people, Alex. Engineers, project managers, people who have given their entire professional lives to this company." He paused, his voice cracking slightly. "He's going to gut the R&D department, the very heart of what your grandfather built. Are you still with me, James?" I asked, my own voice tight. "I've been with you since the day you first called me 6 months ago," he confirmed, his gaze unwavering. "I watched your father pass you over for Marcus your entire life. I sat in board meetings and listened to your father praise Marcus for ideas that I knew came from you. I knew then that the man's pride would be his downfall. The board has lost faith. They are tired of the nepotism, of the excuses, of watching their own stock values plummet. They are ready for a change. We just need a way out. Just give us a way out, Alex." His words solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about my house. It wasn't just about my stolen college fund. It was about the 300 employees in the R&D department. It was about the legacy my grandfather had envisioned before my father twisted it into his own personal fiefdom. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with that call. My plan, conceived in the cold fire of anger and honed over 18 long, patient months, was no longer just about revenge. It was about rescue. Just as the call with James ended, Lucas's phone buzzed with a high-priority alert. His eyes widened as he read the screen. "Alex, you need to see this." He turned his screen towards me. It was an internal memo from Barton and Company's finance department, forwarded by our source inside. "They're making a move. They're trying to do an emergency restructure of the syndicated loan, the big one. They're trying to negotiate new terms with the primary creditor." I looked at Lucas, my heart starting to pound. "Who is the primary creditor?" Lucas allowed himself a small, predatory smile, the first I'd seen in 2 days. "As of 3 hours ago, after the final wire transfer, the primary creditor is us." The room was quiet for a moment, the hum of the servers the only sound. Then I said, "They're walking right into the trap." "It's our chance, Alex," Sophia said, leaning forward, her voice electric with anticipation. "If we act now while they are financially exposed and in the middle of this delicate maneuver, they won't have the time or the resources to counter. They are vulnerable. They won't know what hit them." The lingering past, with all its slights and injustices, had just collided with the immediate present. The ghosts of every "be realistic," every condescending pat on the head, every dollar given to Marcus while I was told to fend for myself, were all screaming for this moment. "Then let's not keep them waiting," I said. The hunt had begun. The next phase of the operation was about precision. It was about exploiting the cracks that greed and incompetence had created. And the biggest crack of all had a name. Victoria Reynolds, my brother's fiancée. Victoria wasn't a villain. In another life, we might have been friends. She was sharp, ambitious, and worked in finance at a competing firm. But she had fallen for the charming, confident facade Marcus presented to the world, the one he'd polished to perfection over a lifetime of having his mistakes erased by our parents. We weren't counting on her as a key part of the plan, but a well-placed source, a mutual acquaintance in her professional circle, had been a valuable listening post. For months, the initial reports were just chatter. Victoria complaining to a friend over brunch about Marcus's reckless spending, his obsession with appearances, his casual dismissal of her own career ambitions. But then the chatter turned serious. The breakthrough came not from a leak, but from a crisis of conscience. We saw it unfold from our listening post. It was a Tuesday night. Victoria had come home late from work, exhausted after closing a major deal. She found Marcus in their shared apartment, not celebrating her success, but surrounded by shopping bags from ridiculously expensive brands, a new $1,000 watch on his wrist. She confronted him. He laughed it off, telling her he'd landed a big bonus, and that she shouldn't worry her pretty little head about finances. Later that night, while he was sleeping, her instincts took over. She opened his laptop. It wasn't hard to guess the password, Marcus #1. What she found made her stomach turn. It wasn't just extravagant spending. It was a complex web of transfers from a Barton and Company subsidiary account, what he called his discretionary fund, to his personal accounts. It was embezzlement, plain and simple. The next day, a visibly shaken Victoria went to the one person at Barton and Company she trusted. The one person she saw as a kind, older mentor, a stable figure in the chaos of the Brooks family, James Whitaker. She went to him for advice, her voice trembling as she described what she'd found. She wasn't trying to betray Marcus. She was trying to save him from himself, to understand what was happening. James, understanding the dynamite he was holding, handled the situation with masterful care. He calmed her down, told her she did the right thing by coming to him, and said he would look into it discreetly. He immediately arranged a secure meeting. It wasn't with me, that would be too risky. It was with a member of Lucas's legal team, a discreet, maternal-looking woman named Eleanor who specialized in forensic accounting. They met in a quiet, anonymous coffee shop in a neighborhood far from the city's financial district. Victoria, thinking she was getting confidential advice from an independent consultant on how to handle a delicate family matter, unknowingly handed us the final proof we needed. Specific details, account numbers, transaction dates. She gave us the irrefutable evidence of Marcus's embezzlement. She thought she was protecting the company and the man she loved. In reality, she was arming the man who was about to take it all away from them. With this new ammunition, our plan was ready to launch. But then, the storm broke sooner than we expected, and from a direction we hadn't anticipated. "We have a problem," Lucas said, walking into our command center late one night. His face, usually a mask of calm composure, was grim. "They know." My blood ran cold. "They know about us? About me?" "No, not about us specifically," he clarified. "But they've been alerted to a potential hostile takeover." Someone talked. An anonymous tip to a financial journalist. "They've hired a top-tier defense law firm, Cromwell and Swain, one of the most aggressive in London. They're battening down the hatches as we speak." A cold dread washed over me. For the first time, my carefully constructed plan felt fragile. We had been a ghost, a whisper. But now they had turned on the floodlights. They were preparing for a fight. "How?" I demanded, my mind racing through our network. "Who had a loose tongue?" "It doesn't matter how," Sophia cut in, her voice sharp and focused, pulling me back from the brink of panic. "It could have been anyone. What matters is our response. Cromwell and Swain are sharks. Their strategy will be to stall, to bury us in discovery motions, to challenge the legitimacy of every shell company, to make any move we make prohibitively expensive. They will try to unmask us. The clock is ticking, Alex. Our window of opportunity, the one created by their loan restructuring, is closing." She was right. The pressure was immense. The room, which had felt like a predator's den, now felt like a cage. We were fighting a war on two fronts. A financial takeover and a sudden, brutal legal battle. That night, there was no sleep. The room was a mess of empty coffee cups, discarded takeout containers, and glowing screens filled with dense legal jargon and frantic financial models. Every path we explored, every strategy we gamed out, seemed to lead to a wall of legal firewalls that Cromwell and Swain had erected in a matter of hours. My confidence, once so solid, began to waver. The image of my father's smug, dismissive face floated in my mind. "Be realistic, Alex. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Maybe I was just a boy playing a man's game. We're fighting them on their terms," I said around 3 a.m., rubbing my burning eyes. "We're trying to break down the front door while they have it barricaded with the best lawyers in the city. It's not working." "So what do we do, Alex?" Lucas asked, his usual composure strained, his tie loosened. "We can't back down now. We own too much of their debt. We're too exposed. If they unmask you before we make our move, the narrative changes. They'll paint you as a vindictive son, not a corporate raider." I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the sleeping city below. My mind was a maelstrom, sifting through every piece of information we had, every conversation, every document, every memory. I thought about my father's arrogance, my brother's incompetence, the company's old-fashioned, patriarchal way of doing things. They were preparing for a modern corporate raid. They were expecting a brute force attack from a known rival. They were looking for a shark. They would never expect a piranha. And that's when it hit me. The quote from Harold Peterson, from the inscription in the book that was still on my desk. "Talent is like water. It will always find its way through the cracks." We weren't going to break down the door. We were going to seep through the cracks in the foundation. "Their defenses are all forward-facing," I said, turning back to the room, a new energy surging through me. "They're protecting their stock, their board. They're preparing for a proxy fight. They're not protecting their own history. The company bylaws, Lucas. Get me the original Barton and Company bylaws from its incorporation in 1968. Lucas looked at me, confused, but he immediately set to work, his fingers flying across the keyboard. A few minutes later, a dusty, scanned PDF appeared on the main screen. It was an ancient document, typed on a typewriter, filled with archaic legal language. Sophia and I scanned it line by painstaking line, and there it was, buried in an appendix, a tiny, forgotten clause, a relic from a different era, written by my grandfather, a cautious man who feared debt above all else. It stated that any single entity acquiring more than 5% of the company's total outstanding debt could, at their discretion, trigger a mandatory, in-person solvency review board meeting, which must be called within 10 business days. It was a protectionist clause, designed to prevent a single creditor from gaining too much power in secret. My father, in his hubris, had never bothered to update the bylaws of the company he considered his personal property. He probably didn't even know the clause existed. We've been acquiring the debt through dozens of shell companies to stay under the radar, I explained, the plan crystallizing in my mind, elegant in its simplicity. But what if, right now, tonight, we execute a transfer? What if we consolidate the ownership of all that debt, all 78% of it, under a single one of those shells? Lucas's eyes widened, then lit up with a brilliant flash of understanding. They'll be legally obligated to call a meeting. Cromwell and Swain can't stop it. It's in their own founding document. Exactly, I replied, the exhaustion of the last few hours melting away, replaced by a cold, sharp adrenaline. Their new lawyers are prepared for a months-long siege. They won't be prepared for a mandatory meeting in 10 days. It bypasses all their expensive defensive maneuvers. It forces them into a room with us before they're ready, before they have time to figure out who we are. And once they're in that room? Sophia asked, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. Once they're in that room, I said, looking at my team, at the first light of dawn creeping through the window. We own them. The doubt was gone. The path was clear. I booked a one-way flight to London. They made a mistake, I said, my voice steady and cold. They looked at the castle walls and forgot to check the foundation. Now we hunt. Landing in London felt different this time. The familiar gray sky and damp air didn't feel like a homecoming. It felt like arriving on a hostile shore. This wasn't a business trip. It was a campaign. I skipped the flashy penthouse suites at the Shard that Veritas Capital usually booked for me. Anonymity was my armor now. Instead, I checked into a modest, discreet hotel in a quiet neighborhood in Marylebone, a place of brick townhouses and quiet gardens, where no one would look twice at a man in a simple suit. My focus needed to be absolute, my presence unnoticed. The board meeting was 9 days away, and I needed to prepare the final, most personal blow. My first meeting wasn't with my financial team or my lawyers. It was with a man named David Chun, the sharp, unassuming real estate lawyer Sophia had recommended. He was her cousin, a man whose quiet demeanor hid a razor-sharp legal mind. We met in his small, cramped office above a bookshop, a chaotic space that smelled of old paper, strong tea, and justice. So, David said, getting straight to the point after a firm handshake. He gestured for me to sit in a worn leather chair. Sophia tells me you have a unique property issue. She said it was personal. I laid it all out for him, the words coming out in a flat, emotionless tone. The house, the 5 years of mortgage payments, meticulously documented. The tens of thousands of pounds I'd spent on renovations. The deed, held in my parents' names under the guise of safekeeping. And the sudden, unilateral sale while I was abroad, communicated to me like an afterthought. He listened patiently, his hands steepled under his chin, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt. He just let me talk. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, which groaned in protest. This is messy, Mr. Brooks. A family dispute over property is never clean. It's often the dirtiest kind of law. Now, your initial idea, buying the entire development company that purchased the house, is certainly one way to get it back. It's a very loud, very expensive way. It's using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and it makes you look like a brute. I'm not interested in looking like a brute, I said. I'm interested in leverage, Mr. Chun. Something more elegant. Something that uses their own actions against them. A flicker of intellectual curiosity appeared in his eyes. Elegance is my specialty, he said. Let me have the original sale documents, the ones your parents signed with the new buyers, and the property records, bank statements, anything you have showing you first began paying the mortgage and for the upkeep. Lucas had already prepared a secure digital file. I passed the tablet to David. He spent the next 20 minutes in complete silence, his eyes scanning every line, every clause, every date. The only sound in the room was the gentle ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner, a sound that seemed to be counting down the seconds to my family's reckoning. Finally, he looked up from the tablet, a thin, satisfied smile on his lips. "Oh, this is more than elegant, Mr. Brooks. This is a checkmate." He turned the tablet back to me and pointed to a specific section in the seller's property information form, the legally binding document where sellers are required to disclose any known issues with the property. Your parents were asked, point 14.2, if they were aware of any latent structural defects or significant structural repairs conducted within the last 10 years. As you can see, they checked the box marked, no. "And?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound. "And," David said, swiping to another file, the bank records from my personal account, showing a wire transfer of £30,000 to a company called Capital Foundation Restorations 2 years ago. "Your renovation records show you paid for extensive work to be done on the foundation. A significant crack was discovered during a survey. It had to be professionally repaired, reinforced with steel rods and resealed. That, Mr. Brooks, is the very definition of a latent structural defect that was repaired within the last 10 years. Your parents knew about it. In fact, I see here an email from your father complaining about the cost and the disruption, even though you were the one paying for it." The air left my lungs. I remembered that email. I remembered my father's whining, his implication that I was being extravagant. By knowingly failing to disclose that, they committed fraudulent misrepresentation, David stated calmly, but his eyes were gleaming. "It's a material falsehood that fundamentally invalidates the contract. We don't need to buy the company, Mr. Brooks. We just need to inform the new owners, through their solicitor, that they were sold the house under false pretenses and that you, the primary financier of the repairs, are prepared to testify to that fact in court. They will be more than happy to nullify the sale and get their money back to avoid a massive lawsuit. And then, we simply have your parents sign the deed over to you, its rightful owner, to make the looming threat of a fraud investigation go away quietly." It was perfect. It wasn't a bombastic display of wealth. It was a scalpel, precise and deadly, aimed right at the heart of their hypocrisy. They had sold my house, and their own lie was the key to getting it back. "Prepare the documents," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But don't act on them yet. Hold them. I'll tell you when." The final days leading up to the board meeting were the calm before the storm. I spent them alone, walking for hours through the gray, anonymous London streets, my hands shoved in my pockets. I was preparing myself mentally, running through every possible scenario, every argument, every denial they might throw at me. The plan was in motion, the pieces were in place, but I knew the final act had to be performed by me, alone in that room. The night before the meeting, I stood in my quiet hotel room, looking at my reflection in the dark window. The city lights blurred behind my image. For a split second, the man staring back at me vanished, and I saw the face of the 16-year-old boy in my father's study, his heart pounding with hope, desperate for a single word of approval. I saw the young man working late nights, fueled by a burning need to prove them all wrong. The hurt, I realized, was still there, a dull, familiar ache in my chest. A flicker of doubt, cold and sharp, cut through me. Was this really who I wanted to be? A man who took apart his own family, piece by piece? Was I becoming just like my father, using power and fear to get what I wanted? My hand, resting on the windowsill, clenched into a fist. I took a deep breath and forced myself to meet my own eyes in the reflection. The boy was gone. In his place was a man who understood that you cannot build a future on a foundation of lies and unanswered injustice. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about truth. It was about finally, once and for all, taking back the narrative of my own life. I received the final email from my assistant, Olivia. The subject line was simple: "Boardroom 10 a.m. Confirmed." I closed my eyes, took one last, deep breath, and let a cold, hard calm settle over me. The storm was here, and I was ready to walk into its eye. The morning of the meeting, the London sky was a sheet of steel gray, the clouds hanging low and heavy over the city. Suited my mood. I chose my suit carefully. It wasn't my most expensive one, from a flashy designer. It was a simple, impeccably tailored suit in a deep charcoal gray, made by a small old-world tailor in Jermyn Street. It was the suit of a man who appreciated substance over style. A crisp white shirt, a dark, conservative blue tie. It was the uniform of a man who meant business, not a prodigal son coming home for a reckoning. I arrived at the headquarters of Barton and Company 10 minutes early. The building was a monument to my father's ego, a monolith of glass and polished granite that loomed over the street, with the Barton and Company name etched into the facade in letters 3 feet high. As I walked through the revolving doors, the security guard at the front desk, a man named Arthur who had known me since I was a boy, a man who used to sneak me sweets when I visited my father, gave me a brief, almost imperceptible, respectful nod. He was already on Veritas Capital's payroll. The palace guard had already switched their allegiance. I took the private elevator to the top floor, the executive floor. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps. The silence was heavy, oppressive, the kind of quiet that precedes an explosion. As I approached the main boardroom, I could hear their voices through the thick, soundproofed oak doors. My family in all their glory. This has to be a mistake, a clerical error. My father, Robert, was booming. His voice was laced with a familiar blend of arrogance and rising panic. An unknown firm can't just sweep in and buy a controlling stake in our debt. It's impossible. Cromwell and Swain are looking into it. This meeting is a farce. I've checked it 3 times, Dad. Marcus, my brother, replied, his voice thin and reedy, cracking under the strain. The paperwork is ironclad. Veritas Capital owns 78% of the syndicated loan notes. They invoked the 1968 bylaws. We're legally obligated to meet their CEO today. Well, where is he? My mother, Margaret, demanded, her voice sharp with indignation. It's utterly unprofessional to be late for a meeting of this magnitude. Who are these people? I took one final, steadying breath, smoothed the front of my jacket, and pushed the door open. The entire board was seated around the long, polished mahogany table, a piece of furniture that had cost more than my first apartment. My father was at its head, his face flushed, a vein pulsing in his temple. My mother was beside him, her face a perfect mask of anxious indignation. My brother looked like he was about to be physically sick. A few other board members, a collection of my father's old cronies, looked confused and angry. And then there was James Whittaker, who kept his face carefully, masterfully neutral, but I could see the glint of anticipation in his eyes. They all turned as one as I entered. A wave of confusion washed over the room. Alex, my father snapped, his irritation overriding any surprise. His tone was the one he used for a servant who had interrupted him. This meeting is for board members only. Whatever tantrum you're having about the house can wait. We're dealing with a serious crisis here. I ignored him and walked calmly, deliberately, to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, the one directly facing him. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. I placed my leather briefcase on the table with a soft, definitive thud that seemed to echo in the tense silence. Actually, I said, my voice calm and measured, carrying easily across the room, I'm right on time. The CEO of Veritas Capital is scheduled to meet with you at 10 a.m. Marcus, a creature of nervous tics, checked his expensive watch. Yes, but he's not here. I met my father's furious glare across the vast expanse of polished wood. He is, I said, my voice dropping a fraction, just enough to make them lean in. I opened my briefcase. I'm the CEO of Veritas Capital. Silence. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was an instant, total vacuum of sound, as if a switch had been flipped, cutting off all the oxygen in the room. My mother's hand, which had been raising a crystal glass of water to her lips, froze mid-air. The glass slipped from her fingers, seeming to fall in slow motion before shattering on the marble floor with a crash that made everyone flinch. My father's face, which had been red with anger, drained of all color, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Marcus just stared, his mouth hanging open, his face a comical mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked at me as if I were a ghost who had just learned how to use a PowerPoint presentation. That's not possible, Marcus finally stammered, shaking his head in a spastic, disbelieving motion. You run a boutique consultancy, a small advisory firm in Zurich. That small advisory firm was a subsidiary, I explained calmly, pulling a thick stack of documents from my briefcase and placing them neatly in front of me. One of many. For the past 18 months, Veritas Capital, my company, has been systematically and discreetly acquiring this company's debt and stock through a global network of shell corporations. As of 9 a.m. this morning, we are the majority shareholder and the primary creditor of Barton & Company, which means, I paused, letting the words hang in the air, I am your new boss. My father finally found his voice, a strangled, guttural sound. This is a joke. A sick, twisted, pathetic joke. Look at the man to your left, Robert, I said, my voice like ice, nodding towards James Whitaker, a man who has served on this board for 30 years. Ask him if this is a joke. James cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to thunder in the silence. He looked my father directly in the eye. The documents are all in order, Robert. The transfer of ownership is legal, binding, and has been verified by our own counsel this morning. Alex Brooks is in control. The finality in James's voice broke the spell. The room erupted in a cacophony of angry, confused voices. But before my father could launch into the full-throated tirade I knew was coming, I held up a single hand. The room fell silent again, the gesture so unexpected, so authoritative. We have a lot to discuss about the future of this company. But first, there's a matter of internal housekeeping that needs to be addressed. I nodded to my assistant, Olivia, who had been waiting patiently outside. She entered, her face impassive, and connected my laptop to the large presentation screen at the end of the room. A series of spreadsheets, bank statements, and wire transfer confirmations filled the screen. These documents, I said, my voice cold and hard as I walked toward the screen, were provided to us by a concerned party. They show a consistent pattern of embezzlement from company accounts, specifically the subsidiary Barton Global Imports, totaling over £2 million over the last 3 years. I turned my eyes on Marcus. He shrank in his seat, his face ashen, looking desperately toward our mother. They trace back to a series of offshore accounts in the Bahamas, I continued, clicking through the slides, each one a nail in my brother's coffin. Funding a lifestyle this company's performance could not possibly support. A villa in Marbella, a leased Ferrari, Patek Philippe watch collection. They trace back to you, Marcus. My mother gasped, a theatrical, wounded sound. No, Alex, how could you do this? This is a private family matter. I ignored her. I looked directly at my brother, the golden child who had never faced a single real consequence in his entire pampered life. You have 2 options right now in front of this board, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Option 1, I forward this entire file, which is already prepared, to the Financial Conduct Authority. With this evidence, you will be prosecuted for fraud and embezzlement. You will go to prison. I let that hang in the air for a long, heavy beat. I watched the sweat bead on his upper lip. Option 2, I said, walking back to the table and sliding a single piece of paper across the polished wood towards him. You sign this letter of resignation, effective immediately. You also sign this personal guarantee, a legally binding document, committing you to repay every single pound you stole from this company. The choice is yours. This was it, the moral test I had set for myself. I could have been merciful. I could have buried it, used it as private leverage. But that would have been my father's way, the way of secrets and lies. My way was truth and justice. You can't do this to him, my mother shrieked, finally finding her feet, her voice trembling with rage. He's your brother. We're your family. Family? I said, finally turning my full attention to her, to my father. Is that what we are? The family that stole my education to fund his failures? The family that sold my home to cover his debts? The family that laughed at my ambitions? I stood up, leaning my hands on the table, the calm facade finally cracking to reveal the cold fury beneath. You taught me a very valuable lesson, both of you, a lesson you repeated just 2 months ago. Business is business. Now, Marcus, choose. All eyes in the boardroom, a room accustomed to my father's blustering monologues, were fixed on my brother, Marcus. He was a fish in a barrel, trapped, cornered by his own greed and my cold, hard logic. The casual, confident bravado he always wore like a cheap suit had completely evaporated, stripped away to reveal the pathetic, frightened man underneath. He looked at our father for help, his eyes pleading, but for the first time in his life, Robert Brooks was powerless. His influence, his threats, his money, it all meant nothing in this room anymore. He looked at our mother, but her tears and theatrical gasps were useless against the damning evidence displayed in high definition on the screen for everyone to see. With a trembling hand, a hand that had signed countless frivolous expense reports, Marcus reached for the pen. His signature on the resignation letter was a spidery, barely legible scrawl, the signature of a man whose world had just crumbled to dust. He pushed the papers back across the table as if they were contaminated, as if they had physically burned him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the polished surface of the table, at his own distorted reflection, a broken man. Good, I said, my voice devoid of triumph. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a necessary amputation to save the body of the company. I gathered the papers and handed them to Lucas. You have 1 hour to clear out your desk. Security will escort you from the premises. Next, I turned my gaze to my mother, who was staring at me with a look of pure, venomous hatred. Margaret, I said, my tone formal, professional. Your position as Director of Communications is now redundant. Veritas Capital has its own established corporate communications team. Your employment with this company is terminated, effective immediately. She stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. You're firing me? Your own mother? After I dedicated my life to helping your father build this company. I'm eliminating a position that is bloated, ineffective, and no longer serves the company's best interests, I said flatly, using the cold, corporate jargon they both understood so well. Finally, I looked at my father. He was sitting ramrod straight, his back rigid, his face a thunderous mask of wounded pride and impotent rage. And you, Robert, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of finality. You will resign as CEO. The board, under its new majority ownership, has already accepted your resignation. James Whitaker, ever the professional, gave a slight, confirming nod. It's true, Robert. The vote was unanimous. You will not get away with this, my father growled, his voice low and menacing, a cornered animal. I built this company from nothing with my bare hands. You inherited this company from my grandfather. I shot back, the truth a weapon I was no longer afraid to wield. And you built it up, yes. But then you let it rot from the inside out with your pride and your blatant nepotism. This isn't a destruction, Robert. It's a renovation, a necessary one. I motioned to the door. You have an hour. The meeting was over. As the other board members, a mix of the old guard and the new, filed out, some offering me quiet, congratulatory handshakes, my family remained, frozen in their chairs. They were statues in a museum of their own making, monuments to a fallen dynasty. The illusion of their power had shattered so completely they seemed unable to move. I left them there, sitting in the ruins of their reign. But it wasn't over. Not quite. As I walked down the long corridor toward the CEO's office, my office, they intercepted me. The shock had worn off, replaced by a desperate, ugly fury. How could you? My mother cried, her voice raw, her carefully constructed composure shattered. After everything we've done for you, done for me? I stopped and faced them, The years of swallowing my anger, of biting my tongue, of patiently waiting were over. Let's be specific, shall we? What exactly have you done for me? Did you support me when I got into the school of my dreams? No, you stole my college fund. Did you believe in me when I started my first business? No, you told me to be realistic and get a job. Did you respect my property, the one asset I had managed to build for myself? No, you sold it without my permission. So please, tell me about everything you've done for me. We did all of it to protect the family legacy, my father roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Something you, with your cold, ungrateful heart, would never understand. The family legacy? I laughed, a short, bitter, humorless sound. Let me tell you about your legacy, Robert. Your legacy is a company full of terrified employees who are too scared to innovate because they know one misstep could get them publicly humiliated and fired. Your legacy is a balance sheet propped up by lies and creative accounting. My legacy? I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a steely whisper, is going to be built on merit, transparency, and respect. Things you, with your blind arrogance, wouldn't recognize if they were printed on your bank statements. They were speechless, stunned by the venom, by the truth. But I knew I needed one final move to sever the ties completely, to take back the last piece of myself they thought they owned. Oh, and one more thing, I said, pulling out my phone and affecting a casual tone. About the house. I saw a flicker of genuine panic in their eyes. For them, the company was an abstraction, but the house, the money, that was real. I had my lawyer look over the sale documents, I continued, keeping my tone light, conversational. It's funny what you can find when you look closely. For instance, a disclosure form where you swore under penalty of perjury that you had no knowledge of any latent structural defects. Which is odd because I have the receipts and the emails between us for the £30,000 foundation repair I paid for 2 years ago. The one you both knew all about. Their faces went white. They were not stupid. They knew what that meant. It's called fraud, I said softly, letting the word land with its full weight. It makes the sales contract void. It's also, I'm told, a criminal offense. So, just like with Marcus, you have two choices. Option 1. I let the new owners know they've been defrauded. They will sue you, and I will hand over this evidence to the authorities. It will be a very public, very messy scandal. Imagine the headlines. Disgraced CEO and wife commit property fraud. It would tarnish that precious family name forever. I let the image sink in, watching their composure crumble. Or option 2, I said, delivering the coup de grace. You both meet my lawyer this afternoon at 3 p.m. and you sign the deed of the house over to me, its rightful owner. Quietly, no fuss, and this all just goes away. My mother looked like she was going to faint, her hand flying to her chest. My father stared at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure, so absolute, it was almost beautiful. He had been beaten, not by money, not by force, but by his own lies and his own greed. He was a king who had been checkmated in his own castle, using a move he himself had taught me. He gave a single, jerky, almost convulsive nod. Defeated, I turned and walked away without another word, leaving them standing alone and diminished in the hallway of the company they no longer controlled. The storm was over, and in the quiet, deafening aftermath, I was finally, irrevocably, free. 6 months later, the London sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the kind of rare, perfect day that makes you forget the city's usual gray gloom. The view from my office, my father's old office, felt different now. The city no longer felt like a battlefield, but a landscape of possibility. Even the name on the building had changed. The ostentatious Barton and Company had been replaced by the clean, modern lines of Veritas Barton. It was a symbol of a new era, a fusion of legacy and innovation. The changes inside were even more profound. The palpable fear that had permeated the hallways under my father's rule, the hushed conversations, the way people would flinch when he walked by, had been replaced by a quiet, focused energy. There was a buzz of collaboration in the air. We hadn't just saved the company from bankruptcy. We were making it thrive. Instead of the mass layoffs my father had planned to appease shareholders, we had restructured, promoted from within, and reinvested heavily in the R&D department, the very heart of the company that he had been prepared to cut out. Today was a big day. I stood with Sophia Chun and Daniel Foster on a simple stage erected in the company's large, light-filled atrium. The space was packed with hundreds of employees. Daniel, the sharp, brilliant executive my father had once fired in a public humiliation over a minor disagreement, was now my COO. He was a natural leader, empathetic and strategic, and his appointment had sent a clear message to everyone in the company on my first day. The era of nepotism was over. Merit was the only currency that mattered now. For too long, I said, speaking from a simple podium, no notes, just from the heart. This company has operated on a top-down model of fear. The profits went to a select few while the people doing the real work, the people creating the real value, were told to be grateful they simply had a job. Today, that changes. A curious murmur went through the crowd. Sophia stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, resonating with the confidence of someone who finally had the power to enact the changes she knew were right. We are proud to announce the new Veritas Barton Employee Profit-Sharing Plan, she announced. Starting this quarter, 15% of this company's net profits will be distributed directly, and equally, to every single employee, from the mailroom to the executive suite. The room was silent for a split second as the words sank in. Then it erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a roar of shock, of relief, of genuine, unadulterated joy. People were on their feet, cheering, smiling. Some were wiping away tears. Others were hugging their colleagues. I saw a junior engineer, a young woman we had recently promoted to team lead, simply cover her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. In that moment, they were no longer just employees, cogs in a machine. They were partners. We were building something together. As I looked out at their faces, I felt a profound sense of pride that no multi-million-euro deal had ever given me. This felt real. This felt right. Later that week, a handwritten letter arrived at my office. The envelope was plain, the postmark from a small town in the north of England I didn't recognize. I opened it with a sense of curiosity. It was from Victoria. Alex, it began, her handwriting neat and precise. I don't know if you'll ever read this or if you even should, but I felt I needed to write it. I wanted to thank you, not for what you did to the company, and certainly not for the humiliation you brought upon Marcus, but for showing me the truth. I was living in a gilded cage, a fantasy, engaged to a man I didn't truly know, and about to join a family built on very dark, rotten foundations. You didn't just open my eyes, you shattered the glass. I have broken off the engagement with Marcus. I left London the week after the takeover. I've started over. I have a new, less glamorous job at a small firm here, a small, cozy apartment, and for the first time in years I feel like I can breathe. I hope you've found your own peace in all of this. Sincerely, Victoria. I folded the letter and put it in my top desk drawer. Her story was a poignant reminder that the fallout from that day had created more than just one new beginning. The truth, however painful, had set more than one person free. My family, for the most part, had vanished from my life. After signing the house back over to me in a tense, silent meeting in David Chen's office, they had retreated, licking their wounds in private. I heard through the grapevine, James Whittaker still had his sources, that my parents had sold their massive mansion and retired to a smaller home in the countryside. Marcus, stripped of his golden parachute and facing a mountain of debt to the company he once lorded over, was reportedly trying to launch another one of his ventures. But without the Barton and Company name and money behind him, no one was interested. I felt a surprising lack of emotion hearing the news. Not pity, not satisfaction, just distance. They were figures from a past life, a story I was no longer a part of. The one person from my past I was eager to see was Harold Peterson. He came to my new office one afternoon, looking exactly the same as he had all those years ago at the country club, impeccably dressed, with a sharp mind and kind eyes, just with a few more distinguished gray hairs at his temples. He didn't say anything at first, just walked around the office. which was now filled with modern art and open spaces instead of my father's heavy, oppressive furniture. He stopped at the large window overlooking the city. "Quite a view," he said. "It is," I agreed. "It's taken a long time to get here." He turned to me, his eyes twinkling. "I always knew you had it in you, son. Even when you were slinging hash browns and trying to figure out how to pay for your textbooks." I smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "I had a good teacher." "You had a good mind and an unbreakable will," he corrected gently. "I just gave you a map and pointed you in the right direction. The question now is, what do you do with all this?" He swept his arm, indicating the office, the company, the power. "It's easy to tear something down. Anyone with enough anger and a big enough hammer can do that. It's much harder to build something that lasts." "I'm trying, Harold," I said honestly. "I want this place to be different, better. I don't want to rule by fear." He put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and proud. "Your father built an empire, Alex. An empire is about power and control, and it's built to serve the emperor. Empires always crumble because they are built on a foundation of fear. But you," he said, looking me straight in the eye, his voice full of conviction, "you are building a legacy. A legacy is about value and growth, and it's built to outlast you. It's built on a foundation of respect. That, my boy, is all the difference in the world." His words settled deep inside me, a profound truth. He was right. The fight, the war, was over. Now, the real work, the work of building a legacy, had just begun. "I'm home." It's a simple thought, but after years of living in transient hotels and temporary apartments, the feeling is so profound it almost brings me to my knees. I'm standing in the living room of my London house, the one I fought for, the one that was stolen and then reclaimed. It's quiet now. The lawyers are gone, the paperwork is filed, the deed is safe in a vault, with only one name on it: Alexander Brooks. Mine. For the first few weeks, every time I walked through the door, I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a jolt of vengeful satisfaction. I thought I'd feel a rush of "I showed them righteousness." But that's not what I feel. What I feel is something much deeper, much quieter. I feel peace. A deep, quiet, unshakable peace that settles into my bones. The house isn't a trophy from my war with my family. It's a sanctuary. It's the physical embodiment of my freedom. I run my hand along a bookshelf I built myself on a rare weekend off, the wood smooth and solid beneath my fingertips. I look out at the small city garden I designed and planted, where green shoots are finally starting to push through the dark soil. This place is part of my story, not for what was done to me here, but for what I did to reclaim it. I realize now that my long, calculated war wasn't truly about destroying my family. It was about liberating myself from their suffocating definition of me. For my entire life, they had written my story. They had told me who I was, what I was worth, what my ceiling was. The takeover, reclaiming my house. It was all just a loud, definitive, and final way of saying, "No, you don't get to write my story anymore. The pen is in my hand now." My real victory wasn't in that boardroom, watching their faces crumble. It was in the quiet moments that followed. It was in the countless small decisions I made every day since. It was in the choice to build up the company, not strip it for parts and sell it to the highest bidder. It was in the choice to give Marcus a path to redemption through repayment, not a prison cell, because I refused to let his failures define my morality. It was in the conscious decision every single day to be the kind of leader Harold would respect. It was in finding a way to win that left me with my integrity, not just intact, but strengthened. On my new desk, a simple, clean-lined piece of furniture that replaced the ornate monstrosity my father would have chosen, sits a single, small, framed photograph. It's a grainy picture of a 16-year-old me, standing awkwardly in an ill-fitting, rented suit next to a presentation board for my first high school business competition. My hair is a mess, my tie is crooked, but my eyes are burning with intensity. I won first place that day. I still remember the feeling, the shock, the thrill. My parents never came. They were at one of Marcus's polo matches. It was more important to be seen there. For years, I kept that photo hidden at the bottom of a box, a painful, bitter reminder of their indifference. I thought about throwing it away 100 times. But the day after I moved back into this house, I took it out. I dusted it off and placed it on my desk. It's not a symbol of their failure anymore. It's a symbol of my beginning. It's a reminder that the young man in that picture, with his cheap suit and his big ideas, didn't need their approval to succeed then, and he doesn't need it now. He just needed to believe in himself. My journey wasn't about getting my parents to finally see my worth. It was about me finally seeing and owning my own. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight to define your own worth, against your family, your boss, or even yourself? Share your story in the comments below. I genuinely love to read them. And if this story moved you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing so you don't miss what's next.